this thing work. Where am I? I think I got to go down here. All right. Okay, so we're going to finish up the presidency. I don't think I'm going to do the Trump impeachment. That's a little too close to, a little too recent. There's just no sense in, I don't know, talking about something that controversial right now. We've dealt with it quite a bit. So let's finish up the president. And then I think I'm going with interest groups. I kind of like the way interest groups introduces Congress. So next week I'm going to interest groups. I sent you an article this morning already on kind of the different ways that, the kind of the political divide and the coronavirus. And I think it's real interesting. But I'm finishing up the presidencies here. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the vice president. All right. And so the vice president's chosen to balance the ticket. When somebody's running for president, he wants somebody who has strengths where he has weaknesses. So the other night, Biden made a point of saying, so you got a white guy, an old white guy that's going to get the Democratic nomination, 99% likelihood now, according to 538. And so he needs, he announced, on that debate, was it Sunday night debate, I believe, that he was going to pick a female vice president. All right, so somebody's going to offset his weaknesses. Stacey Abrams here in Georgia, who ran for governor of Georgia, is on, I think, the short list. An article I read said she's not going to get it. Like the number one candidate was Kamala Harris, according to that article. So an African American, she's also part Indian, woman from from California, another part of the country. What's the lady ran for president? Gosh, I'm so senile. It'll come to me. What's the lady from Minnesota that we have a hard time saying her name? Yeah, that's ridiculous. I can't remember her name. All right. So she was number two. So she would kind of reinforce his strengths while still being a woman. All right. But Pence, Pence in demeanor is almost exactly the opposite of Trump. So, Trump's this over-the-top, in-your-face guy, and Pence is kind of a Christian conservative. He's kind of become the point man to some degree on the coronavirus response for Trump. All right, constitutionally, the vice president is the president of the Senate. If something happens to the president, he replaces him. If there's a tie vote, 50-50 vote in the Senate, the vice president will vote to break that tie. Okay, he's got a staff. He's got access to the president's information. It's kind of up to the president himself as to how much influence he's going to have. Dick Cheney is kind of seen by historians as the most influential vice president ever. Some Bush critics, W critics, blame Cheney for the Iraq War. Let's see, Biden, what was it? I believe, I can't remember who said it, that the vice presidency was not worth a bucket of warm spit. I believe the guy's name was Garner. I believe he's one of Franklin Roosevelt's three vice presidents. Biden told the story of, he says, funny little story, a lady had two sons, one became a sailor, one became vice president, neither was ever heard from again. So kind of illustrating that point. Now, Obama-Biden was kind of a buddy movie. Hey, another, the number one most attractive option for Biden, Michelle Obama. Now, I think most people say she wouldn't take it. I think she's indicated something like that. But, the Obama-Biden partnership was, maybe the warmest partnership of a president or vice president. Johnson hated the Kennedys, so I like that picture of Johnson. John Kennedy was pretty nice to him. His brother Bobby was not nice to Johnson at all. Johnson was used to having lots and lots of power as a majority leader of the Senate. And so really, really just miserable as vice president. So some of the conspiracy theorists like to link him to the Kennedy assassination. Okay, so just varies. There's a buddy movie, there's one that's not, and those are two Democrats, so it doesn't really vary by presidency much. Okay, so this one's interesting. The 25th Amendment. All right. 25th Amendment, when we learned it in U.S. history last year, it's just presidential succession. You know, the president dies, the vice president becomes president. All right. But it's in the event of a presidential removal, a death, a resignation. In this case, hey, what if Trump got coronavirus? All right. It's probably the case that Pence would be interim president. All right. But it also says that a new president who's taking the place of a president has to choose a new vice president. Johnson, who became president in 1963, when Kennedy was killed, did not have a vice president, didn't choose someone until 1964. So in some ways, and Johnson had a heart condition. So the people who studied say really the reason he didn't pick someone, he enjoyed the idea that Americans were worried about the president's health. All right, so the 25th Amendment is in part a response to that. All right, but there's this other part of the 25th Amendment. If the vice president and majority of the cabinet vote that the president's gone crazy, he's unable to discharge his duties, the vice president would become president. Now, if the president doesn't agree to that, it requires a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress. So it's actually harder than impeachment to use. So early in the Trump presidency, the Democrats were fantasizing that Pence might invoke the 25th Amendment on him, but it's just harder. And Pence has turned out to be a very loyal vice president. Okay, so interesting stuff there. Let me take a breath. You look at that. Okay, here's number 2. So the last thing we're doing here is looking at 3 theorists on what makes a good president. In other words, hey, the Article 2 of the Constitution is fairly short, and all presidents have the same constitutional power to pardon. You know, they got to make the State of the Union, carry out laws, take care of the laws that are faithfully executed. All right, but some presidents are a lot better than other ones, more successful. All right, so we got 3 theorists on what makes for a good president. All right, so the first guy wrote a book, I think maybe the 70s, it's called Presidential Power, and it says, he doesn't have all that much constitutional power. Neustat's the guy's name. So his real power is the power to persuade, here we got a couple of pictures. Here we got Carter and Reagan, back-to-back presidents, with Tip O'Neill, who was the Democratic Speaker of the House, Irish Catholic, Boston, Speaker of the House from during the 70s and 80s, and Reagan, who differed from him very much ideologically, got along much better with him, so had more success working with him, whereas Carter came across as somebody who was kind of condescending, because he's really religious, kind of thought he was a better person than O'Neill maybe. They didn't work as well, in spite of the fact that they were from the same political party. All right, so Reagan was more persuasive with O'Neill than Carter was. All right, Neustadt says that, hey, the point of view or perspective of the president is unique. I've basically got, my family and to a lesser extent my classes as my constituencies. The president's got the whole country, and he's the only one that has that. So he's got a unique vantage point. All right, according to Neustadt, there's 3 groups. There's the people inside the Beltway, the Washington establishment. Reagan was good with the Washington establishment. I'd say maybe Roosevelt, Kennedy, both pretty good with Johnson maybe. Carter wasn't. Trump, calls the establishment the swamp. So, that's not, really a strength for him. All right, party activists, in this case, Republican Party activists, very pro-Trump. They're the key to supporting primaries and donations. Trump's run up huge majorities in the primaries, so much so that we hadn't really even talked about that. So he's 1 for 2. All right, and the third constituency is the public as a whole. And so the challenge, you can inspire the public when you're campaigning, but it's sausage making. Making laws is more, it's more troubling. So you govern in prose is a quote. And so the Republic often, the president often uses what Teddy Roosevelt called the bully pulpit, where he's going over the heads of Congress and speaking to the people to get them to pressure Congress to do what he wants. And so the continued Trump rallies have been kind of instructive here. Obama really struggled with that. You know, there he is crying when there's been a school shooting and saying, you know, I keep making this speech. I'm tired of making this speech, but I can't do anything about it because he never could get Congress past gun legislation. All right. So there they are. 2 down. Okay, so then we have one called Presidential Character. Writing in the 70s, guy's name is James David Barber. And he says, hey, presidential character is unique, it's a little different from personal character. And so he says, presidents either like the job or they don't like it. So it's better to like it, and they either work hard or they don't work hard. And it's better to work hard. So the best combination would be what's called active positive. For him, the worst wouldn't be passive negative, be active negative, because these guys get kind of paranoid, and so they're always working to go after their enemies, maybe. So Johnson and Nixon fit that bill for him. Okay, one thing he says is look at their first big success as a leader. And he'll draw lessons from that. He'll apply those lessons to the presidency. So, you know, Trump wrote the book Art of the Deal. So his approach to the presidency is got to be kind of a tough deal maker based on his experience like in New York real estate. Okay. Okay, so get you up a little. So here, try to do this. Pause it for a minute and try to come up with a president that you would say is active positive, the best. And then active negative, the worst. You know, see if you can come up with somebody other than Johnson and Nixon. All right. Active positive, passive positive, and passive negative. You know, come up with presidents for those categories. So pause it for a second. Okay, so Roosevelt was active positive. There's the guys for active negative over here, and this one's ironic. So Carter read the book. Burt Lance, who's from Calhoun, gave him the book. You know, Burt Lance worked for Carter for a long time. Carter came to Burt Lance's funeral. So Carter read the book and set out to be active positive, but he got so frustrated with the job, he's always kind of got that look on his face. So I'd really kind of put him at active negative. Reagan famously didn't work all that hard, so he's passive positive. Excuse me, I promise it's allergies. All right. Calvin Coolidge in the 20s, passive positive. You know, he made a point of not working hard, taking naps, not talking much. So there's examples. All right, now some problems with this theory. Number one, it's kind of biased in favor of Democrats. You know, Republicans tend to not think that the president should do as much. Also, Abraham Lincoln is the greatest. And Washington, neither one of them particularly enjoyed the job. And so I don't think either one of them, I think Lincoln would be over here. You know, he's forever miserable at the telegraph office, working 20-hour days, waiting on news of the latest battle. Washington wasn't somebody who felt like the president, you know, what was a great thing. He didn't really enjoy it, I don't think. So neither one of the top two presidents would fit the bill. You know, president number 3 comes in here. So maybe it's a theory of the modern presidency, but it's a little biased, and it doesn't account for great presidents very well. It's kind of my critique of it. Okay, one thing you want to take note of, presidents are generally popular at the beginning of their presidency. This is not, well, part of this theory, but, you know, I had to slide it in somewhere. So this is the honeymoon period, the first 100 days. And then he gets less popular. Generally speaking, poll numbers decline because he's got to make difficult calls. Only the controversial stuff comes to him. Then there's occasional surges. These are called rally points. So, for example, Carter, by the time the hostage crisis really ruined Carter, but right after the hostages got taken, he had this rally around the flag effect, and his approval rating was 60%, even though over time it got down to like 30%. All right, but there's your average, poll numbers. It's generally a decline over time, but you get this blip with these rally points. Okay, just sitting here. And the last one, so we're going to be done in 20 minutes maybe. All right, the two presidencies. All right, so if it comes in at under 20 minutes, I'll probably go ahead and send you this little video thingy on interest groups, introducing interest groups. All right, so this guy Vildovsky said there's two presidencies. There's really two presidents. There's the foreign policy and domestic policy. An example of this would be the first George Bush, who was just a master of foreign policy, and then the economy fell apart and he couldn't handle domestic policy fairly well, so he lost, to Clinton. And so one year, like 1991 maybe, Bush was the man of the year. So he's the man of the year as a great foreign policy leader. The Gulf War, just this masterful war that he conducted, and bad at domestic policy. So he's two separate men. One a good example, one a bad example. All right, generally speaking, you run for president saying what you're going to do on domestic policy. Americans are not as concerned with foreign policy, but they find that foreign policy is easier because you don't have to get Congress to go along with it on it. So a lot of times when things go bad for our presidents, poll numbers go down, and takes a trip. Gets out of the country, talks to other leaders, has more success. All right, let me see. So Bush and Obama didn't really seem to fit that. So Iraq ruined him. For a time, he had some domestic success, but then the economy goes bad. Johnson, Vietnam killed him, so he doesn't fit it. Trump, he killed the guy al-Baghdadi. So that's very successful. Ukraine, kind of got him impeached, not convicted, but impeached. So hard to make the case that foreign policy is his strength. That's not. He's got peace and prosperity, but I wouldn't say that foreign policy is more of a strength for him than domestic policy is. All right, that's it. All right, stop and that's it for the president. Stop and review it. I'm going to hit escape. All right, I'm going to go up here. I'm going to stop the recording. I bet it came in at under 20. Let's see.